So hello and welcome to Aim High Awesome Leaders. I am your host, Camilla Hasler, and today I am extremely excited to introduce my guest. In terms of today's episode, it needs a special introduction because we have a bit of a legend on the podcast today. So I'm super excited to introduce really a genuinely multi-talented and impressive individual. So Story Tweedie-Yates is my guest today, and she has had a career arc that really refuses to sit inside a kind of single one box, right? Story began her initial journey in life on the courts at Stanford, where she was studying, but she also competed simultaneously in a very demanding degree as a Division I tennis athlete. And that mix of discipline and curiosity, which we're going to cover today, but it carried her into what then became a professional tennis career, and she earned titles on the ITF circuit and reached world rankings inside the top 200. Let's all just take a moment to think about what an impressive achievement that is and how talented you need to be in a sport to get to the top 200 global rankings. And after retiring from sport, Story made a leap into what most people would consider virtually unthinkable or impossible. She stepped straight into the world of cybersecurity and went to build a seriously impressive path as a product marketing and positioning leader at some of the top tech, security, and other complex tech firms. Her work at companies like RAD Aqua Security, RAD Security, and FusionAuth has made her today a very trusted voice on how to turn complex technology into clear, compelling stories for the market that buyers actually understand and resonate with. And she is well known today for her philosophy and positioning, that positioning is not just a one-time decision, but a living, breathing hypothesis. And she believes that clarity beats complexity. And we'll come on to that in today's episode. So really, today we'll be covering Story's journey from athlete to marketer to strategic storyteller. And Story brings a perspective which is genuinely shaped by resilience, reinvention, self-leadership, and a deep understanding of human behavior. So this conversation today and today's episode is about the moments of Story's life that shaped her, in addition to the lessons that founders can use to sharpen their own message. Story, welcome to the episode. Super excited to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. And I'm blushing. What a wonderful introduction. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Story, for joining. And with that, let's dive in. We have such an exciting topic today, and I'm super excited to hear from you on this. Story, what drove you initially to move from psychology and competitive sport into the world of enterprise security marketing?
Yeah. So, I mean, first by necessity, right? I didn't even, despite the ranking, I didn't make a whole lot of money playing professional tennis. So that was the first thing. But, really it was accidental. So I knew I needed to make a career change. I went to business school and kind of one foot in front of the other, just trying to hustle and get in there. And I think, the common thread, I always had this dream of when I was a professional tennis player, really making money like Serena Williams or something, I would do good for other people and I would use that position to do good. And so cyber and IT security really spoke to me, and that it's really, an industry that's doing good in the world. So that's kind of like a similar thread. Unexpected for me, but that's how it went.
Amazing. Wow, that sounds fantastic. So, Story, you studied psychology studies and also developed that pro athlete discipline. How did that influence your mindset as you entered the tech and marketing sort of space?
Yeah, so the degree in psychology, because it was at Stanford, and Stanford is such a strong research institution, that they really just kind of imbued in me the whole, like, you're going to use data and you're going to use research to tell a story. So there was kind of that first thing, which has stuck with me, whether as a CMO or positioning or whatever, it's just stuck with me. And then, on the tennis side of things, just competitiveness. I mean, anybody who knows me knows I'm super competitive. And if you want to win, you got to get your positioning right. So
You're positioning on the court and in the marketplace. I love it. And I love the comparables there. Okay. So amazing. Then, as you applied this, right, what were some of the biggest challenges that you perhaps faced during that transition? Can you tell our listeners in terms of, the emotional transition, the mental transition to making that pivot? Because again, a lot of people are quite nervous about doing something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I basically went from a situation where I knew the drill, I knew the game, I knew everything, to really nobody wanted to hire me because they didn't understand, and I was not correctly and adequately communicating my value. And I actually had a turning point. I was with, and somebody at the time just basically had a bit of a hard conversation with me, and they heard me interview, and they were like, you should read this book. You should really read this book. And so I read a book called How to Interview Like an MBA. And from there, that was a turning point for me. And I was able to explain the transferable skills. But I mean, I went through withdrawal, physical withdrawal from playing and being so active all the time to not. And it was a good 2-year transition fully from retiring to getting a job / internship and really kind of launching. So it was tough.
Wow. And just so our listeners are also aware, I've seen Story speak today, and she is fantastic. She is so charismatic, and she is really entertaining as well. So just to say that not only did Story overcome that in that moment, but today, of course, looking back, again, she is such an accomplished speaker and speaks globally as well. So very impressive. Story, was there a defining moment when you realized about the link between this kind of aha moment between positioning, messaging, and the psychology that you'd learned, and you felt like within security that would become, a core strength for you and defining aspect of what you bring to performance metrics or teams?
Yeah, and it's funny. It actually comes back to positioning. And one thing, anybody who's listening and trying to move their career forward needs to understand is people do need to put you in a bit of a box. So I learned that pretty early on, just accidentally, but I learned that I was much more interested on the tech side of things. And when you're more interested in the tech side of things, you go in the product marketing box, and that's where people put you, right? And if you're more interested on more of the data side, you generally go to demand gen and growth. So, I found out that box, but it was gradual. I don't think there was one moment. It was just kind of where I found that to get security and to make sure that I could interview well and get roles, I was like, okay, this is where I need to be, and it's what I like anyway. So why not?
I love that. That's such a great kind of approach, right? So helpful as well for our listeners because, Story, again, this podcast was created to help people to understand how to apply the concepts of leadership without necessarily having that experience, right? So super helpful to know that. And in fields like cloud security, Story, if we come on to more, do you feel in terms of enterprise SaaS and niche B2B products, you went on to work for some of the largest companies in this space. And do you find that where companies are claiming similar features, why is it that positioning is so much more powerful than actual technical product capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, people's stacks are full. They have a ton of tools that are already in place. So there's no yeah, and even though these spaces are new, like cloud security is relatively new, enterprise SaaS isn't as new, but cloud security is still pretty new. And so if you're not compelling, why should anybody put you in their stack that's already full? And by the way, there's a list of 7 other people that are ready to jump in there in that new space. So it's like if you're not able to even get them to look at your product, then your product doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's in that sense, just to even get a foot in the door, you have to have some level of compelling narrative.
Okay, amazing. And so it sounds like, Story, from what you explained just there, that it's that link with the competitive angle as well that you learn on the courts, right? It's the competition, got to get in there. Yeah, right. And so in terms of this, based on all your expertise today, what do you find typically goes wrong when companies are getting a bit reliant in terms of, features, and how does that maybe affect their buyers' impressions and perceptions and trust of the the company and the brand?
Yeah, so interestingly, there's academic research around this that shows that the more feature focused arguments versus the more benefit oriented arguments uh, impact price sensitivity. So basically, if you differentiate on more than features, your customers, your prospects are much less willing to, or much more willing to pay a higher price. Versus if all you are toting are features, it becomes a very price sensitive race to the bottom with the competition, unfortunately.
Yes. And so Story, how is it then that if companies were looking to better identify and define a real buyer archetype, and I say this as I know that today you have a business which helps startups in the tech space to do this, what are the real buyer archetypes like C-suite decision makers or security lead or compliance officers? What are some of those that they need to define and understand perhaps before they build that positioning strategy?
Yeah, I think there's a nice short story around this. So I was at a cloud security company, and we were trying to sell to folks who cared about Kubernetes security. And what we kept finding was that the deals were scuttled because that person we were trying to sell to was basically beholden to the decision of some other person, and not from a hierarchy perspective, more from like an internal organization power perspective, right? And everybody knows, every organization you've been in, there's a more powerful buyer, there's a more powerful person. So a good rule of thumb is to figure out who's the person that's scuttling the deals and see if, okay, well, can we sell to them instead? And what features do we need for them? Because if we're selling to the least powerful person, we're never going to make inroads.
That's so interesting story. So essentially, there's a lot of people getting stuck on the end user, but in fact, yeah, it sounds like you're saying play to the decision maker.
Yeah, yeah. Play to the person that's getting the tools they want, that's able to get the budget that they want. Because if they want you, they can pay for you.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And so, Story, again, from your experience, could you possibly share with our listeners in terms of what is almost like a use case where positioning or the lack of it really made the difference in terms of winning or losing, like could be a specific deal or
Yeah.
a point in a company's journey?
Yes, and as anybody who knows me knows that I'm equally as skilled at losing than winning. So let's talk about a losing scenario. So I was a product marketing person at Cisco, and my product was it's called Cloud Web Security. ScanSafe was the original name of the product. It's actually London based. Anyway, Cisco bought OpenDNS, which toted at this, like its positioning was spot on. And OpenDNS basically said, look, we can do everything that Cloud Web Security does faster, better. And by the way, we're not a proxy. And anybody who's worked with proxies knows they kind of suck. So they just completely outpositioned, outgunned us. And in the end, they ended up taking over the entire business unit at Cisco. Lots of, I would call them famous people kind of in, our circles, came from that acquisition, came from that company. But their positioning was just spot on. And what they knew that the cloud web security market was in the firewall category. And so they're basically saying, okay, we're like a cloud firewall type of a thing, and we can do this as well, and we can do it better, and we'll get rid of your pain with the proxy. We lost a lot, majorly. It was still all Cisco, but my business unit suffered.
Wow, that sounds like a difficult time story. And again, really emphasizing the importance that if there's, just certain aspects of positioning, which is a little bit out, even as a potential, as a market leader, it can be very challenging. So it really emphasizing how important it is to get that spot on for businesses. And Story, thank you for sharing that example. I mean, I guess if we come on to positioning and more around, differentiation and credibility and things like that, when you set out to work with a tech startup or a tech business today, when you begin crafting positioning and working on a complex product, what might be the kind of starting point you would take with regards to market analysis or customer pain points and niche definition, or would it be something else for you?
Yeah, yeah. And these are such great questions. These are so thoughtful. So where I like to start with people, given the fact that it's going to be iterative. So what you're going to be doing next year is not the same thing that you're going to be doing this year, even if you're doing everything right. I like to start with just what are your business goals? Is your goal an investment milestone? Is it a certain revenue number? Fine. Okay. Then with that, well, then who do you need to beat out the majority of, or maybe even just 20% more? Who do you need to beat out in order to hit that goal? And from there, at least gives people a start on their anchor, which is the most important thing in positioning, which is who you're comparing yourself to. And so that's a good way to kind of get into it and understand what you're really working with.
Amazing. Wow, super clear. Okay, thank you for that story. So when you are working on this, how would you tend to balance out the need that these businesses might have to really stand out, be visible, perhaps though combined with the need to build trust, legitimacy, especially where in the tech space, there's a lot of skepticism. And today we do have a more security conscious business markets.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're right in the sense for sure of the credibility and snake oil is picked up pretty quickly. People also don't appreciate being, again, there's academic research that says even something as simple as putting your brand name in your slogan, people don't like that because it feels like they're being sold to. People don't like to be sold to, they like to buy. And the way to figure out how to, and then the way you really get around this is making sure you have a strong comparative anchor. Who are you like? Who are you better than? And it can either be explicit or implicit in your materials. You don't have to call anybody out negatively, but that at least, especially for a new product, it helps people orient you in their brain and immediately gives you credibility because you're tied to something they already know. You're speaking their language from the get-go.
Fantastic. So from what you just described, that story really, it sounds like some companies are not approaching it from that perspective at all when they start working with you. And so there's a shift there, right, where they need to create, like you described, those associations to really click quickly. And today, I guess we live in times that more than ever, our attention span is getting shorter and shorter. So I can imagine that becomes even more important. And Story, in terms of the mental models or messaging frameworks that you might rely on or translate, right, because you might have a highly technical, complex product,
Yeah.
and then a buyer who is not from a technical background. How do you turn that into potentially a more compelling, more human-centered narrative? Is that what you would do, or would you do something different?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so if you can get the comparison to something that's in their mind already, you already have a good leg up. So just for example, let's take Coca-Cola, which is the soda king, queen, emperor, whatever we want to call it. And if you're trying to position against them, 7 Up came along and they called it the Uncola. So immediately you at least have the you at least have what will matter for that thing that you're trying to prospect into. Now, I mean, from a human perspective, I think there are a lot of different ways that there are a lot of different ways to tell a story. And so I think there are just some basics that people need to get. So for example, just the tagline, as long as you stick within a format of 5 to 7 words, you keep things concrete, like saying shoe instead of clothes, just as an easy example, and stick to benefits. Those are some, when you stick with that, there are lots of different ways to tell a really human story. And similarly for the pitch deck, I've seen a million different versions of the pitch deck. I don't think there's one right way or wrong way to do it, other than you have to get across the message of why this, why now, and why us. And with those kind of models, you can tell a story in the way it needs to be told based on, your circumstance and business.
Wow, fantastic. Well, such clear points, a story from your side in terms of some of the areas that these brands need to look at and these businesses, right? And love that big FMCG analogy as well, because again, in terms of association, it's one of the fastest in terms of association, right? To choose something really established. In terms of red flags, right, that you might watch out for when positioning and, anything that might sound too technical, confusing, or even things like, over-promising, being too sales-driven, which I think you alluded to earlier. How might you help to correct that sort of area Story for these businesses?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of feedback that you get initially, especially when you're doing a new message and new positioning. And In the beginning, it kind of comes down to how willing your internal team is actually to state the message and how proud they feel about it. If they don't feel proud about it, if they don't, it's either a tweak to the messaging, like for example, making it positive versus negative. Like something sucks, instead of saying do this instead, you don't generally want to be positive. It's either a tweak. It's usually just a tweak. Once you've gotten to that point, it's usually not having to go back to the drawing board.
Fantastic. And it sounds like also, as you alluded to earlier, right, that, yeah, with the positivity, it's so important not to knock the competition, though they are actively in the picture, in the marketplace, right?
Right. Right.
So, Story, in terms of if we now move on to, in terms of the feedback loops and repositioning over time, let's say, as you're working with a business and have been for a little bit, how is it that early stage or small companies could potentially test some of the new ideas that they have without burning through what is presumably quite a limited budget,
Yeah.
or risking that, kind of potentially more, again, limited credibility that they have built up in that time?
Yeah, I mean, the best way, honestly, is just to try to sell. If you've outlined your target audience, if you've outlined what you're going to pitch to them, then if you're actively trying to capture their attention and you're actively trying to get their business, that's going to tell you most of what you need to know. However, if you are a business that has pretty large web traffic, you can also do A/B tests on the homepage. And there are kind of cheaper. So Winter, Winter, is a solution that can help with quick message testing. SageTap is a tool where you can get some general message testing and talk to prospects. Still up in the air how good that is for actual demand gen, but from a testing perspective, that's another good tool on the cyber side of things.
Fantastic. And so, Story, in terms of the feedback and signals that you would look for, so perhaps, market responses, client reactions, objections, or even data, would that tell you, is it time to revisit or update positioning?
Yeah. I mean, the key pivot points, let's say, are first of all, when you transfer from being founder-led sales to sales-led sales, and you have to actually teach somebody to do it, and you all have to kind of get aligned. And once you get beyond 10 people, it gets a little hard to control the message as well. So those are for really small companies. That's a time when you think, okay, you actually need to, they probably haven't done their positioning yet at that point, so just do it. And I would say if you have done positioning before and in terms of repivoting, if you keep being told that you're a smaller feature of a bigger market, that's a real warning. And if you keep getting objections like, we've already got this, we've already got that, and they just don't want to engage further, then you need to change what they think you are. And same with if they keep putting you into a price war, then you don't haven't positioned any value in their mind and you're just features, which also needs some repositioning help.
Got it. Well, that actually makes it sound really straightforward as well. So fantastic. And so, a Story with regards to if we now come on to, how much weight that you actually place as the expert in terms of customer and user language, right? Where you've mentioned in terms of jargon and other things. How would you compare that? And particularly when coming across internal assumptions and when working on refining positioning with a business.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, a good rule of thumb is never put an acronym in a tagline. And I keep coming back to the tagline, but the tagline is it's like the ultimate positioning tool because it kind of condenses all your positioning into 5 to 7 words. So that's why we keep coming back to it. But the tagline is also interesting because it'll tell you when you need to actually refine your assumptions. If you can't get the tagline right and it sounds like there's too much jargon or whatever, you haven't done the right work on the first step. So it's like a canary in a coal mine type thing, your tagline. And creative wording, there's no way you can get around it. Sometimes you can spend hours on this and not get it right. And if you know that's happening, that's a warning sign that the inputs are not correct. It's not about the creative wording, if that makes sense.
Totally, Story. So in terms of if if you think of a time, for example, has there been a time when you've had to really significantly reposition for a brand or an offering? And what was it that might have triggered, that specific decision? And how did you help in that case to really manage the transition while maintaining the trust of perhaps the business in what you were doing?
Yeah, I mean, luckily, so I did have one relatively strong scenario where we completely, because we rebranded, we changed the company name, we repivoted because the company name at the time had the thing that we needed to pivot around in it. So we had to change the company name in order to pivot into a different mind space. So luckily and so the warning sign for us was what I had mentioned before, which is you're a smaller feature of a bigger market. And the traction was really slow to come, is too slow to come. That was the first warning sign. And then maintaining credibility around the solution as we pivoted. Luckily, we pivoted into something. We pivoted into something and there was innovation there when we launched. And so the company was already known as being innovative, albeit in the wrong positioning, the wrong offering, but innovation. And so the innovation stayed consistent in the new area that we went into.
Amazing. And so, Story, in terms of, again, now if we come on to a slightly different area, right? More around leadership and communication and team alignment, which again is another specialism that you bring. As a leader from technical fields, how is it that you help to ensure that teams really balance their technical accuracy with storytelling? And I know you've given a few examples of this, but how might you do that again when not everyone in the room and around the board table is really a technical expert and has a sense of what to do?
Yeah, and you know what? I'm also susceptible to this, right? Like I don't have a technical background, even though I've been working on this stuff for a long time. And so I make mistakes. And an example, in my last company, we tried to basically compare against the practice of mocking. And mocking is what engineers have to do when they test a solution, a SaaS product. If you're a SaaS product, they have to do mocking in order to get a unit test going. Now, I didn't really know what mocking was ahead of time, and I had to actually learn that. And what happened and what I try to set up for anybody else on the team that's maybe not even as technical as I am, and I'm like in the, middle to advanced like side of things, still making mistakes, is review before it goes out, and give yourself a good test period. So, what happens when you release new messaging, there are mistakes that are made, there are small things that have to be changed in order to be positive, in order to build that trust. And you just have to provide consistent feedback, get the feedback, and then review things before they go out. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody's working on this, even technical people, so who are more technical than me. So yeah.
Got it. So by what you described, Story, it is a team effort. It's genuinely a team effort and a team
Yeah.
approach.
Yep.
Fantastic. And so, Story, how is it, again, just coming back to leadership and your background in psychology and high performance sport that we spoke about at the start of this episode, how has it influenced your leadership for those, listening who want to perhaps develop their leadership qualities under pressure or during, really major stakes transitions, which might involve, significant revenue and or risk?
Yeah, so what's interesting is I kind of learned this later in the game, and I wish I had actually known. And what's nice about business and when you work in business is that you do learn the team aspect much so more so perhaps even than in team sports. So the thing that I learned from the sports side was just resilience and confidence. Confidence to know what I know and know what I don't know and be humble about what I don't know. And then what I learned after transitioning into business was there's a book by Dale Carnegie called How to Win Friends and Influence People, and just how to work effectively as a leader and get what you need while at the same time, and yeah, I mean, make people feel important. There's all these rules around it, which are super helpful. So I learned that later, not as early as I would have liked, let's say.
Well, I mean, I think the key thing, Story, and you mentioned such a great book there, right? And it's that appetite for learning. And this is something that I notice really sets the most high achievers apart. It's a continuous appetite for learning by what you described and interest in that. And yeah, so good to hear that. And so, Story, in terms of coming on to habits and mindsets, again, what are some of the ones that you believe are most critical for founders and marketing leaders where, again, perhaps they're navigating in some really huge, seemingly huge positioning battles in, what are quite uncertain and saturated markets today?
Yeah.
what would you highlight that you have developed within yourself to kind of let our listeners know is important in this?
Yeah. Yeah, I asked an investor actually the other day what he thought that the difference was between the companies that end up being in the right space at the right time over time, not maybe initially, but eventually, and the companies that don't. He said it was discipline. He said it was disciplined leadership. And what that means to me and what I've observed is there are a lot of great startup frameworks out there. And there are a few key things that you need to be learning over time and keeping all your efforts geared toward. It's your audience, it's your buyer, the budget category that you're going to sell into, and the general category that you're going to play in. And those are morphing all the time, but there are models. So it's all about accountability to your team, to your investors, to yourself. You have to be super disciplined about it and be looking at this stuff all the time. But if you do, per the investor, this is how you end up iterating sooner and sooner and sooner to where you need to be.
Great. Great. And so, Story, based on that as well, just coming back again to cross-team collaboration and alignment, right? So, again, just in terms of leadership challenges, I believe that can be one of the most significant challenges that some of these businesses will be facing as well. So if you were speaking a little bit more on how you ensure that alignment so that the positioning does stay consistent and authentic, is there anything more that you could share and or recommend as a kind of actionable strategy on that?
Yeah, I would recommend that anybody that's doing positioning, they involve the key people from product, sales, and the executive team. So, for example, if founders are still involved in the day-to-day business, they need to be involved in the creation process. And not just because not just because they need to be, kept involved, but because they probably have good feedback as well. And then after there's a source of truth that everybody keeps needing to pull back to once you've done the hard work. And that's the messaging framework, which is where all of your assets are listed. So if somebody wants to know what's the copy for the event header, it's all there. And so we're all being consistent saying the same thing.
Yeah, consistency. Wow. Okay, that's great, Story. Thank you for that. And so, Story, now moving on to, because, we've spoken a lot there about corporate and the corporate businesses that you help and work with. But I believe today that a lot of your work is around founders and more early stage startups, right? So if we come on to those businesses, if you had to give just 3 non-negotiable rules for positioning a hard to sell or niche offering, what would those rules be?
Yes. So the first one is if you can't communicate a clear comparison against something else that people know, you're off the map. You're done already. So that's number one. You don't even have a shot. Number two, in terms of how to execute positioning, you have to begin with the end in mind, and it has to come out with actual deliverables that live publicly. So taglines, website, pitch decks, etc. And the third one is kind of like the first one, but a little more that if you have to make a stand for something, that's better than doing the wrong thing, basically. So take a stand and then move later, but don't be nothing. Don't stand for nothing. That's the worst thing you could do.
Right. And when you say that, Story, I mean, again, today brands can be apprehensive. Businesses can be so apprehensive about the implications and the reputation that they're building and developing. So I love that, Story, that you're recommending to be bold
Right.
from the start and the
Yeah.
outset. And so, Story, if we come on to some of the common mistakes, right, with the founders and the early stage companies that you see these companies make when they're selling security, it could be complex SaaS or something else niche, B2B tech. What is it that you would recommend they should do differently?
Yeah, so the nature of being a founder, and I've experienced this as well, but by definition, being a founder is kind of against what you need to position correctly because you have to know your innovation well. You have to be thinking about how you're different versus necessarily how other people are thinking about things. So my advice and the mistakes that I see people doing is not forcing themselves to go as quickly as possible from what they're naturally going to be good at as a founder, which is the innovation piece, as quickly from that to what's the category in people's minds, to what are the key business results that the prospect is going to buy me for. If you can go boom, 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 you're going to avoid the mistake of just spending too much time in innovation land versus getting to market, getting prospects, and iterating.
Wow. Okay. So really get started sooner from what you described, right, Story. Amazing. And so for companies who have perhaps really quite limited recognition as they're just starting out, and how is it that you can help them and do help them to build that credible positioning that they have, again, without the risk or, getting burnt by overpromising and then getting unhappy customers?
Yeah, so hype is one thing that I think is confusing for folks is that hype can be great for content, but from a positioning perspective, it can be dangerous because hype is usually something that's new. It's usually something that's unknown. So if you're going to anchor yourself to hype, you're anchoring yourself to something that's unknown. Um, don't do that. Instead, find a comparison that people know about and compare yourself to that, and then use the hype in your content and social strategies.
Amazing. So there's a time and a place for hype, but
Yeah.
it's not in positioning. Love that. So good. So Story, in terms of, again, now metrics and signals in marketing are really, central to a lot of, I guess, marketers out there.
Yeah.
What are some of those ones that these companies could monitor or look at to really start just first step to determine where their positioning is starting to work or failing? Would it be something like conversion or brand awareness? What are the areas you would recommend they look at?
Yeah, and I love this question because the metrics are important, and lots of times marketers struggle to connect the positioning to the actual metrics, but they're 100% related. So the first signals that would make sense to look at are the outbound success and qualified meetings and how hard or easy that is to do based on what you're telling people. Are they getting calls with you? Are they the right people? Another thing is your average selling price compared to the competition. So if you have any intel and you feel like the competition's getting much bigger deal sizes than you are, yeah,
Mm.
a potential problem. And then simple homepage click-throughs and inbounds. That depends a lot more on the business model, though, I will say. So between those three, those would be good to look at.
Fantastic. Thank you, Story. And so now, if we go on to the future outlook and trends and strategies, again, another area that marketing loves to cover and is such an exciting piece. What are some of those kind of in this space as technology and regulations and buyer awareness is constantly evolving? What changes do you, Story, foresee in terms of positioning strategies for those in security, cloud native, or enterprise offerings over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I've noticed that so spend is much more because the market's gotten tighter, so spend is tighter even for startups, and people are much more focused on the external results of positioning. So I expect, and I do have already seen a higher focus on the website as a part of the positioning bill of materials, so to speak. You have some early winners that are getting into categories and then they just dump money in and they become kind of household names. So there's a lot of focus on the website earlier to counteract some of these trends that people are doing to just, win.
Yes, amazing. And so helpful, Story. And so, in terms of how you foresee, again, with rising demand, maybe for credibility and ethics and things like clarity, how are these potentially, can you foresee these shaping positioning in the coming years, Story? And what is it that companies might need to start to get ready for and prepare now?
Yeah, from a credibility perspective, if people feel like they've been listened to and they feel like you're talking to their specific pain points, that gives you the clarity, that gives you the credibility. So you're just never too early figuring out how other prospects think about your space. You can do a really simple exercise, just put together a bunch of technical terms, your prospects to organize them into categories and name the categories themselves. It's called an open sorting exercise. Do that super early on. Do it at an event. Do it at a networking event. You're never too early to start doing that, and that'll be the key to your positioning success.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Story, for that recommendation. And so Story, for any founders out there who really want to stay ahead, coming into, as we go into 2026 as well, what positioning principles do you feel are timeless and no matter how the market shifts, will still apply?
Yeah, sure. First thing, and it's framed in the negative, but hopefully everybody can forgive me for that. So first, don't be vapid, right? So people can sniff out BS. Be credible, back it up with your product and your offering. Don't just say what people want because your conversion won't be there. So don't be vapid. Don't be ambiguous. Say something, be somebody, have a point of view, even if it's wrong. Doesn't matter. People will like the fact that you have a point of view and they'll rate you higher in other areas. And then, don't sell people in the sense that people want to buy. Nobody wants to be sold, let's say. So just be cognizant of that and talk about value, talk about benefits. I think those, so ambiguous, don't be ambiguous, don't sell people, and don't be vapid.
Okay. Very clear. Very clear. And don't hard sell as well by the sound of it.
There's a time and a place for sure, but maybe not the tagline on the homepage, right?
Well, Story, it has been such a pleasure to have you as a guest on this podcast today. And thank you so much for all of the immensely valuable tips that you have shared and provided today. For those listening who really want to get in touch with you and to understand how they can potentially learn more and even work with you, can you tell everyone a little bit more with regards to how they can get in contact and also anything you'd like to share with regards to your business?
Sure. Yeah. No, thanks, Camilla. So Hard Knocks Positioning is, and it's just me. So you work directly with me, and LinkedIn is great. Or the website is hardknockspositioning.com. So either of those two ways are great. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Story, thank you. For those listening, check the show notes as well to this episode for those links to connect with Story. Make sure you do check out Story's profile and also connect with her. And with regards to Story, today's episode, I'd just like to thank you so much again for all of the incredible leadership and principles that you've shared around positioning. Is there, in terms of a final words that you'd like to share with our listeners? And yeah, thank you again, Story, for all of this.
Yeah. No, thanks. These are fantastic. They're probably the best positioning questions I've had actually ever for a podcast. So Camilla, props to you, and thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you, Story. I'm so glad to hear that. And with that, I will again encourage everyone to check out Story's work, check out her business homepage, and watch this space for what Story is working on this coming year. And if you have not already followed this episode and this show, this is Aim High Awesome Leaders. Make sure that you follow the show. Make sure that you subscribe. And with that, I will thank everyone for listening. I will say I'll see you on an episode soon, and wish everyone a wonderful week ahead. And thank you again, everyone. Thank you.